My sister kicked me out of her house in the middle of winter, and a year later, she showed up at my door, begging for mine. The portfolio case slipped from my hands and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, a sound that sliced through the still air of my sister Rebecca's pristine kitchen. For a second, everything froze. Then Daniel, her husband, looked up from across the room. Our eyes met. His widened, full of guilt. The kind of guilt you can't mistake once you've seen it. We need to start making plans to get her out now that the business deal is coming through, I heard Rebecca say from the other side of the wall. Those words snapped something inside me. 5 months. That's how long I'd been living under their roof. 5 months of rent paid on time. 5 months of helping with their son, cleaning their house, cooking dinner. 5 months of believing I was family. Today was supposed to mark my unofficial anniversary of moving in. Instead, it marked the moment I realized the truth. Rebecca, I said softly. She spun around so fast you'd think I'd caught her stealing. Her hand flew to her throat. Allison, she said, her voice a little too bright. I didn't hear you come in. I should have said something calm or clever, but my throat locked. Betrayal doesn't come out easy. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left just a shell standing there, under those perfect marble countertops, and that stupid fruit bowl she rearranged every morning like it was sacred. The help they'd offered me? It was never about helping. It was about money mine. I was a financial stopgap, as Daniel had once accidentally called it. They just didn't think I'd ever hear it. You're home early, Daniel said quietly, taking a small step back. Like physical distance might save him from whatever confrontation was about to happen. I remembered that dinner months ago when they'd offered me the room. Rebecca had smiled across the table, holding my hand. What kind of sister would I be if I didn't help you get back on your feet after grad school? She'd said. I'd believed her. I'd been so grateful. I'd cooked dinner 3 nights a week. Paid rent. Watched their kid when the babysitter canceled. Cleaned the bathrooms. I'd listened to Rebecca complain about her interior design clients not appreciating her vision. And yet apparently I was just another bill to cut once their business deal went through. I bent down to pick up my portfolio. 5 years of design school and a master's degree had taught me one thing: control your hands, even when your world's shaking. When I stood back up, I met her eyes. I heard everything, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Let's talk honestly for once. Rebecca's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then composed herself in seconds flat. We were just discussing future plans for the nursery, she said, hand drifting to her stomach. Nursery. She wasn't even showing yet. Rebecca. I cut her off. The business deal came through. You don't need my rent money anymore. Daniel took another step back. He always did that, fade out when things got messy. He might have been family by blood, but right then, he looked like a stranger in his own kitchen. Rebecca's embarrassment hardened into righteousness. You shouldn't eavesdrop in someone else's home, Allison. Admit her. Someone else's home. Not our home. Not your home too. Just someone else's. That hit like a punch. 5 months under their roof, paying nearly full rent, helping raise their kid, and still, I was just an intruder in her perfect little world. How long do I have? I asked quietly, clutching my portfolio. Rebecca gave a fake smile. We can discuss details later, she said smoothly. We'll sit down and work out a timeline that's fair to everyone. Fair. As if anything about this had ever been fair. I nodded once and turned toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. Upstairs, my so-called temporary bedroom, suddenly felt like a stranger's space. I wasn't family. I was a transaction, and they were done collecting. The next morning, when they were out, I sat at the shared family computer. I only meant to check my emails, but the system automatically logged into Rebecca's account. I froze when I saw it. Subject. Contract finalized. $175,000 commission. 3 weeks old. My hands trembled as I scrolled through. The thread was full of congratulations from their partners, proof that their finances had been stable for a while now. Then I saw an email from Rebecca herself. We need to discuss how to diplomatically handle the Allison situation now that we're back on solid ground. The pregnancy gives us the perfect reason without seeming callous. Perfect reason, like I was a piece of furniture they no longer needed. I closed the email and pushed away from the desk. My pulse hammered in my ears. For months, I'd been paying rent, cooking, cleaning, believing I was helping family through a rough patch, but they'd been fine all along. I'd been their cushion, nothing more. That night, Rebecca set the table with obsessive precision. Everything about her was calculated now: the perfectly folded napkins, the way she placed me at the end of the table, farthest from Daniel. He sat across from her, silent, his arms crossed. Then, in the most casual tone imaginable, she said, Daniel mentioned something that concerns me. He said you've been overly friendly with him. The words slapped me harder than I expected. I turned to Daniel, waiting, hoping for him to deny it. He didn't. He just looked down at his plate and gave the smallest, cowardly nod. That's not true, I said evenly. And you know it. Rebecca's hand moved protectively to her stomach again. We've also noticed some of the people you've had over when we weren't home. My fork clattered. What people? I haven't had anyone over. Jeremy mentioned strangers, she said, referring to her 6-year-old. Children don't lie. And why are questions främst into others? What är prisingstaters? And främst into up of the comses. I could feel the walls closing in. It hit me then they weren't just kicking me out, they were building a story. Making me the problem. So they'd look like the victims. I think, she said, cutting her meat neatly, you might be happier somewhere else. Especially since we'll need your room for the baby very soon. How soon? I asked flatly. 3 weeks should be plenty of time, she said. 3 weeks. In this housing market. Right. Daniel finally looked up. There are plenty of places online, he said lamely. Yeah, I replied, with 6 to 12-month wait lists. And first and last month's rent due up front. Rebecca smiled a tight, cold thing. You've been living rent-free for months, Allison. Surely you've saved enough. Rent-free? I nearly laughed. Instead, I walked to my room, grabbed the folder with my bank statements, and dropped it on the table. I've paid rent every single month at the rate you set, I said, pointing to the highlighted transfers. She barely glanced at it. We hate to do this, but family comes first. Our growing family needs this space. Family comes first. The irony nearly made me choke. I gathered my papers, my dignity barely intact, and walked upstairs. That night, I sat on my bed surrounded by those same papers, the evidence of how hard I'd tried to do everything right. And I asked myself, do I confront their lies and risk being thrown out immediately? Or keep quiet and plan my exit? Principles or survival? Truth or stability? There's no easy answer when both cost you your home. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, listening to the faint hum of their heater, the same heater I'd probably helped pay for. The next day, my phone started buzzing before I even had my morning coffee. 3 missed calls. 2 from aunts. 1 from my cousin. How could you leave your sister when she's expecting? Rebecca told us you found a place closer to work. They said it like I was abandoning her, like I was the villain in a story Rebecca had already rewritten. I looked out the kitchen window, and there she was, Rebecca, watering her petunias, waving at me sweetly, like she hadn't just destroyed my life. I didn't bother explaining myself to Aunt Margie. She wouldn't have believed me anyway. When I came home that night, I found 4 cardboard boxes stacked in the middle of my room, my belongings crammed together, bent, and carelessly packed. I started packing for you, Rebecca said from the doorway, one hand on her stomach. Just being helpful. Helpful. My design presentation board for tomorrow's meeting had a small tear in the corner. Did that get damaged? She asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. Moving was chaotic, she said. That night, I lost Wi-Fi access. Password changed. Daniel opened the bedroom door in his bathrobe when I knocked. Security concerns, he said. I'll text you the new password later. I had a presentation due in 3 hours. I ended up in a coffee shop, finishing my work using their shaky internet connection. Later that day, Rebecca called. Just wanted to let you know the painters are coming Monday for your room. Oh, our nursery, I mean. 2 weeks before the deadline we'd agreed on. I didn't even bother arguing. I just hung up. Every night after that, I scrolled through rental listings until my eyes burned. Rejection emails piled up. We've selected another candidate. Waitlist full. When my friend Cynthia offered her couch, I nearly cried with relief. It lasted 4 days until her boyfriend moved in early. Just for the weekend, she said. But I saw it in her eyes. It wasn't temporary. That night, I parked behind the design studio. Reclined the seat. Tried to sleep. The gear shift dug into my leg. The temperature dropped into the low 40s. By morning, my fingers were so numb I couldn't hold a pencil properly. When I got to work, my client looked at me and frowned. Are you sure you can meet our deadline, Allison? You look exhausted. Absolutely, I lied. The sketches were sloppy. My brain fogged from no sleep. But I kept going. Because what else could I do? The nights blurred together, cheap motels, parking lots. The occasional coffee shop that stayed open late enough for me to pretend I still had a normal life. Every morning, I'd sneak back to Rebecca's house just to shower before work, timing it down to the minute so I could be gone before she and Daniel came home. The house I'd once called home, now felt like enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach knot up. I'd turn the faucet on low, terrified the sound of running water would give me away. That was my life. 5-minute showers, gas station meals, and the constant fear that someone would find out I didn't have a place to live. By the 3rd week, my savings were gone. Every cent I'd planned for a deposit was spent keeping myself warm. Then one morning, Ellen, the new designer who joined our team 2 months earlier, walked into my office. took one look at me, and said, "You look like hell." She wasn't wrong. My skin was pale, my eyes sunken, and the caffeine shakes were getting worse. I tried to brush it off. "Didn't sleep well," I said, pretending to focus on my sketches. But Ellen didn't leave. She just stood there, watching me. Then, quietly, she placed a coffee on my desk and pulled up a chair. "My apartment has a pull-out couch," she said simply. "It's not fancy, but it's yours if you need it." I froze. I wanted to say no, to keep pretending I was fine. But my throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, tears blurred my vision. "I can pay you," I whispered. Ellen shook her head. "Don't worry about that. I was homeless once too. Somebody helped me. This is how we break the cycle." Her words cracked something open inside me. For weeks I'd been running on pure survival. Hearing her say that kindness could still exist was almost too much. All I could do was nod. That weekend was Rebecca's baby shower. I should have skipped it. Every cell in my body screamed not to go. But I knew what would happen if I didn't. Rebecca would spin a story that painted me as the bitter sister, the ungrateful one, the one who couldn't let go. So I showed up, gift in hand, smile glued on. The living room was overflowing with flowers, pink ribbons, and people I barely knew. Everyone laughed, clinking glasses of sparkling cider. I stood near the back, invisible, until Rebecca's voice cut through the noise. "I want to thank Allison," she said, raising her glass, "for understanding our need for family space and graciously moving out." In extreme, 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. "Don't you want to say something about your new place?" she asked, her smile perfect, her tone sweetly venomous. The room went silent. Everyone waited. They all expected me to play along, to nod, lie politely, and protect her image like I always did. But something inside me finally broke, or maybe it healed. I set my glass down and said calmly, "I don't have a new place yet. The housing market's tough, as you all probably know." The silence was deafening. My aunt's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. My mother's smile faltered. Rebecca's face flushed scarlet. For the first time in months, I told the truth and didn't apologize for it. That moment didn't solve my housing crisis. But it did something else. It gave me back my voice. 3 days later, Ellen introduced me to her landlord, a kind older woman who owned a few small properties outside Denver. "It's basically a shoebox," Ellen warned as we drove there. "But it's clean, and the rent's decent." The apartment was tiny, barely enough room for a bed, a table, and a small desk. But when I saw the morning light streaming through the east-facing windows, I knew this could be home. The landlord, impressed by Ellen's recommendation, smiled and said, "You can move in tomorrow. First month's rent due next week." I almost hugged her. That night, Ellen's friends helped me move in what little I had. They brought things too: a futon from someone's guest room, mismatched dishes, a lamp rescued from an office renovation. By midnight my tiny apartment looked alive. Not perfect, not fancy, but mine. I hung my one-framed print, a vintage Denver skyline, above the desk. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Over the next year, I rebuilt everything. Work stabilized. My design clients grew. I kept every document, every email, every message, every cruel little thing Rebecca and Daniel had said or done. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed truth. Proof that what I'd lived through was real. Then, 13 months later, the phone rang. Rebecca. It was the first time she'd called since I'd moved out. "Allison," she said, her voice trembling. "How are you?" I stayed calm. "I'm doing well," I said. "Working on a new restaurant design." "That's good." There was a pause. I wasn't sure you'd answer. Silence stretched. Then she finally said it. "We've hit a rough patch. The business collapsed. We lost the house last month." For a moment, I said nothing. Just sat there, remembering nights I'd slept in my car outside that same house, remembering the freezing February air, the condensation on my windshield, the way my toes had gone numb. "Where are you staying now?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "In a motel," she whispered. "Just temporarily." "And the kids?" Her voice broke. "We have 2 now. Jeremy and baby Sophia. She's 4 months old." I nodded, jotting notes in my sketchpad out of habit. 2 children. No home. No income. My brain slipped into problem-solving mode. "How long can you stay at the motel?" I asked. 3 more days. Maybe 5. If Daniel picks up extra shifts." She hesitated, then said softly, "The children shouldn't suffer for adult problems. They're innocent in all this." The words hit me like a blow. I closed my eyes, remembering that night in my car, me, shivering under a thin blanket, watching my breath fog up the glass. I'd been innocent too. "I agree," I said. "No one should." Rebecca tried to soften her tone. "Look, I know things weren't perfect when you lived with us. We weren't at our best. But it wasn't that serious. Everyone goes through rough patches. Wasn't that serious? That dismissal, that refusal to take responsibility lit something inside me. I remembered the boxes she'd packed for me without asking. The ruined presentation boards. The Wi-Fi she cut off the night before my deadline. "Rebecca," I said carefully. "What exactly are you asking me for?" She hesitated. "We need somewhere to stay. Just until we get back on our feet. A month, maybe 2. Blood is thicker than water, ally. We're family." It's not water, family. The word once meant everything to me. Now, it just sounded like manipulation dressed up as guilt. I took a slow breath. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll call you back." Before she could say more, I hung up. Then I called Ellen. "Let me guess," she said when she picked up. "Rebecca's in trouble." I sighed. "They lost everything. She wants to stay here." "It is not explained." Ellen was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," I admitted. Conflicted. They're family. But, I looked around my little studio, the place that had saved me. Every corner of it was a reminder of how hard I'd worked to rebuild my life. "Remember where you were a year ago," Ellen said gently. "Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's survival." Her words settled in my chest like truth. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent hours researching family shelters, rental assistance programs, food banks, emergency housing. I compiled everything into a clean, organized document with links and phone numbers. By midnight, I'd created something useful, not pity, not guilt, help that actually helped. When I finally closed my laptop, I realized it was the first time in a long time that I felt in control. Then my phone rang again. "Daniel this time." "Allison," he said quietly. "I need to tell you something." I sat up straight. His voice sounded different, hollow, but honest. "Those things Rebecca said about you, being inappropriate with me. None of it was true. I should have said something back then. You deserve the truth before we ask for help." I couldn't even speak. 13 months too late. But still it mattered. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because we have nowhere else to go," he said. I hung up. Numb. When I opened my laptop, I saw a new email from Mom. Subject: "We need to talk about your sister." I closed it without opening. Tomorrow, I'd call Rebecca. I'd give her the document full of resources, not my address. Because this time, I'd help without losing myself. 2 days later, the knock came sharp, insistent, and far too early in the evening to be anything good. 3 raps, no text, no warning call. Just 3 quick hits on my door that echoed through my tiny studio apartment like gunfire. I was halfway through dinner, a bowl of pasta on my fold-down table, when I heard my father's voice from the other side. "Allison, it's Dad. And Mom. We need to talk." I froze. The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. But my car was parked right outside. And if there was one thing my parents had perfected, it was persistence. I opened the door. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow hallway, both looking older than I remembered. Mom's fingers fidgeted with the clasp of her purse, opening and closing it like a nervous tick. Dad's posture, usually so straight, so sure, was slightly hunched. "Can we come in?" Mom asked, already glancing past me into the room before I even answered. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the modest space that had become my home, all 400 square feet of it. The bed that doubled as my couch. The kitchenette with exactly 2 feet of counter space. My small drafting desk, the one place where my world made sense. Dad cleared his throat as they Saturday. "We've spoken with Rebecca and Daniel," he said slowly. "They're in a real bind." Mom nodded, her tone soft, pleading. "They need somewhere to stay, honey. Just for a while. They have the children. It would only be temporary." I didn't respond. I just stood there, letting the silence grow heavy between us. Dad tried again. "Just a month or 2 until they find something else. Family needs to stick together during hard times." And then came the real line, the one meant to guilt me into compliance. "If you can't find it in your heart to help them," Mom said quietly, "I don't know how we can all gather for holidays anymore." The tension would be unbearable. There it was, the ultimatum wrapped in parental disappointment. I took a slow breath, walked to my desk, and pulled out a folder I'd been saving, a contingency I hoped I'd never need. "Please sit down," I said. They already were. I handed each of them a stapled packet, 10 pages, neatly highlighted and organized. "This," I said evenly, "is a comprehensive list of housing assistance programs in Denver. Section 8. Family shelters, rental vouchers, churches that cover security deposits, even emergency housing foundations. I've marked the ones that specifically help families with young children." Mom blinked, staring at the pages like they were written in a foreign language. "But you have space here," she said weakly. I shook my head. "Not really. This apartment's barely big enough for me." "But that's not the point, is it?" I sat on the edge of my desk and met both of their eyes. When Rebecca and Daniel pushed me out, I spent nights sleeping in my car, I said. In February. The temperature dropped to 19 degrees. Dad's face went pale. You never told us that. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. She told everyone I left by choice. The silence was thick, the kind that carries shame. While I was looking for safe parking lots, they were in their 4-bedroom house with heated floors. The same house Rebecca was so proud of showing off. Mom looked down at the packet in her lap, her fingers tracing the list of organizations. I rebuilt my life without family support. I continued. I found housing. I kept my job. I made a new support network. They can do the same, starting with the information in your hands. No anger, no tears, just truth. That apparently was enough. They left soon after, awkward goodbyes and forced hugs. For the first time in years, I didn't cry after seeing them go. 2 weeks later, we were all sitting around my parents' dining room table for the first family dinner since Rebecca and Daniel's financial collapse. The tension was so thick you could have carved it with a butter knife. Rebecca sat across from me, perfectly composed in her tailored sweater, wearing victimhood like it was high fashion. Daniel was quieter than usual, eyes on his plate, shoulders slumped. Mom had insisted on this dinner, calling it a chance to clear the air. I knew better. It was a performance. Rebecca cleared her throat. It's just hard to understand, she said, looking directly at Mom. Allison has space, but she won't share with family in need. After everything we did for her, that was my cue. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was another timeline carefully dated, fully documented from the day I moved into their house to the day I was forced out. Rent payments, email exchanges, text screenshots, and even witness statements from coworkers who'd been with me when certain lies spread through the family. I stood. This, I said, placing a copy in front of each person, is the truth. It includes every payment I made, every conversation we had, and every accusation Rebecca made against me. Rebecca's face went red. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're trying to make us look bad. Before I could respond, Daniel spoke. His voice was low, but steady. It's accurate, he said quietly. Everything she wrote happened exactly like that. The table fell silent. Mom's hand flew to her mouth as she read. Dad flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with every turn. I stayed standing. I wasn't doing this to embarrass anyone. I was doing it because I refused to let my story be rewritten again. I'm not sharing this to hurt anyone, I said finally. But I'm done carrying the blame for something I didn't do. I looked at each of them, my parents, my sister, her husband. I've learned something important this past year. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, honesty, and support. If those things aren't there, blood doesn't mean much. The silence that followed was heavy, but freeing. I sat back down and picked up my glass of water. Dinner continued in strained murmurs. No one looked me in the eye, and for once, I didn't need them to. In the weeks that followed, I heard through Ellen that Rebecca and Daniel had applied for one of the housing programs I'd recommended. They were approved emergency assistance for families with children. They found a small apartment on the outskirts of Denver. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. Just peaceful. The relationship with my parents stayed complicated. Occasional calls, careful small talk, like we were all afraid of stepping on old wounds. Then, one Tuesday, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, my mother's handwriting on the front. I turned it over in my hands, debating whether to open it. Inside was a single piece of stationery, folded neatly into thirds. No long apology, no excuses, just one line. I read your timeline again. I understand now. I'm sorry. That was it. And somehow, it was enough. 6 months later, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new condominium. My condo. Even after all that time, it still felt surreal. I'd bought the place with the money from my latest design contracts, steady work, solid clients, my own company logo, engraved on a nameplate, Allison Hartwell Designs, building beauty from blank slates. Every time I touched those words, I thought about that winter, the one where I slept in my car wondering if I'd make it. Now I lived 10 minutes from downtown, with hardwood floors I'd chosen myself, and the kind of light that artists dream about. On my shelves, framed photos told the story of my chosen family. Ellen laughing during our hike in Boulder, our makeshift Thanksgiving dinner when we'd squeezed 4 people around a tiny table, the grand opening of the Westbrook Hotel lobby, my design with Ellen and our friends cheering behind me. No pictures of Rebecca or Daniel. None. And that was okay, because family wasn't about who shared your DNA. It was about who showed up when you had nothing left. That afternoon, Ellen came over with a bottle of champagne. This place is absolutely gorgeous, she said, stepping inside. You've created something spectacular here. We'll have sang with the Rexaria way. Couldn't have done it without you, I said honestly. Soon, the apartment filled with people, co-workers, friends, neighbors, laughter bouncing off the walls that had once been bare. Jackson, from the design firm, raised his glass to Allison and her incredible new home. Everyone cheered, but Ellen stepped forward. "If I may," she said softly, "I want to toast something beyond these beautiful walls." She turned to me. "To Allison's resilience. When I met you, you were sleeping in your car, still showing up to work, still designing brilliance. You never broke. You never compromised your integrity. You taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty and truth." The graftest range for mated statically. I couldn't stop the tears this time. She continued, "You've built more than a home here, Allison. You've built a life that honors who you are." The words hit deep, not like flattery, but like healing. The kind of healing that comes from finally standing tall in your own story. The night after the housewarming party, when the laughter finally faded and the last champagne glasses sat empty, I stood alone in the living room. The city lights glittered through the windows, reflected across the hardwood I'd chosen piece by piece. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. My phone buzzed a text from Mom. "Coffee tomorrow? Just you and me." In a question no he rowing to a problems. When mating it something skyded, I hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. The last time we'd had coffee together, we'd barely spoken 10 words without walking on eggshells. But something in her message felt different. Not controlling, not guilt-tinged, just simple. So I typed back, "Sure, noon works." The cafe we chose sat halfway between our home's neutral ground. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, catching on the polished tables. Mom was already there when I arrived, a cup of tea in her hands and a paper neatly folded beside it. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't just any paper. It was the timeline, the same document I'd handed out at the family dinner, worn now, edges soft, creases deep from being read over and over again. She looked up when she saw me. "I read it again last night," she said quietly. "I think I understand a little more each time." I sat down across from her. "Understanding is all I ever wanted," I said. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I should have seen it sooner. Your father and we were so conditioned to believe Rebecca's version. She's always been persuasive. And you've always been strong, too strong sometimes. We thought you could handle anything." "I did," I said softly. "But I shouldn't have had to handle it alone." That's a play that one of the Ventures now censor. For the next hour, we really talked. Not in the careful edited way families often do, but openly. She told me about how helpless she'd felt watching everything fall apart between her daughters. How guilt had shaped her silence. When we finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "Thanksgiving's in a few months," she said gently. "We'd love to have you. And Ellen too, if she'd like to come. Any of your friends, really. The house feels too quiet with just your father and me." The invitation wasn't a demand. It wasn't an obligation. It was an opening, small but genuine. On the drive home, I passed Rebecca and Daniel's old house. Only, it wasn't their house anymore. A young couple lived there now, their toddler wobbling down the driveway on a bright red tricycle. The sight stopped me for a moment. The same driveway where I'd once carried groceries, thinking I belonged. But there was no bitterness now, no longing, no sting. Just peace. Sometimes closure doesn't come from apologies or revenge. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a door clicking shut behind you, leaving only calm on the other side. That evening, as the sky turned violet over Denver, I sat at my drafting desk, the same one I'd nearly lost, sketching concepts for my next project. A non-profit workspace designed for women rebuilding after hardship. It was inspired by Ellen. And by me. And by all the people who'd had to start over from nothing. The tagline I'd scribbled at the top of the page read, "A space for second chances." I smiled. Because that's exactly what life had given me. 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail from Daniel. His voice was tired, older somehow. Worn down by a reality he'd once hidden behind Rebecca's confidence. "Allison, I wanted to thank you," he said, "for sending us those resources. We found a place. It's small. But the kids like it. Rebecca's adjusting. I know saying sorry won't change what happened. But I wanted you to know. I'm trying to be better." He paused, exhaled. "You deserve better from both of us. Take care of yourself." I played the message twice. Not because I needed the apology, but because I wanted to hear what accountability sounded like, even if it came late. Then I deleted it. Some things didn't need saving. A month later, my firm got a new contract, a historic hotel renovation downtown. My biggest project yet. The client loved my designs, especially the integration of natural light and open communal areas. "You have a way of making spaces feel alive," they told me. "It's not just design, it's emotion." I smiled. thinking how strange it was that everything I'd once lost had somehow taught me to create warmth out of emptiness. When the deal was finalized, I stepped outside the office, phone buzzing with messages of congratulation. Ellen texted first. Knew you'd crush it. Then a second later. Dinner tonight. My treat. I typed back a simple heart emoji, and slipped my phone away. That evening, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city, the same skyline that had once felt unreachable. Cars hummed below, lights flickering across buildings I might one day design. For a long time, I'd believed that success meant proving people wrong. But standing there, I realized success wasn't about them. It was about finally feeling safe inside my own life. The hum of the city faded into the steady rhythm of peace. Later that week, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail, this time from Rebecca. No return address, just my name written in careful handwriting. For a long moment, I debated opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it straight into the recycling bin. But another part, the part that had learned closure doesn't always look how you expect, told me to read it. Inside was a short note written on lined paper. Allison, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the kids are safe. We're working again, small projects here and there. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at that dinner. About what family really means. Maybe someday, when things settle, we can start again. Not as sisters who owe each other, but as people who understand each other. Rebecca. I sat back, letter trembling in my hands. No manipulation this time. No excuses. Just honesty. And maybe that was enough for now. That night, Ellen stopped by with takeout and 2 bottles of cider. We ate on the couch, legs tucked under blankets, the city glowing outside. So, she said, gesturing toward the letter on the coffee table. You gonna reply? I shrugged. Not yet. Maybe someday. When it feels right. Ellen nodded, then smiled. You know, I think you finally built the kind of life you used to dream about. Not quite, I said, smiling back. But I'm getting there. We clinked bottles. Outside, the city hummed alive, forgiving, full of possibility. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. The next few weeks moved in quiet rhythm work. Sketches, deadlines, late-night coffee runs with Ellen. It was the first time in my adult life that peace felt sustainable. Not fragile, not borrowed, just mine. But one Tuesday morning, as I was reviewing blueprints in my downtown office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Allison Hartwell, I said. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. Hi, it's Margie, your Aunt Margie. The one who used to call and guilt me about family obligations. The one who'd scolded me for abandoning Rebecca when she was pregnant. I swallowed the irritation rising in my chest. Hi, Aunt Margie. It's been a while. Yes, well. She sighed dramatically. Families go through things. But your mother told me about your new business, and I just want to say how proud we are. You've really come into your own. It sounded rehearsed, but I appreciated the effort. Thank you, I said. Then she cleared her throat. Anyway, Rebecca and Daniel told me they found a little place near Aurora. It's not much, but they're managing. Things are looking up. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's good to hear. They mentioned you haven't been by, she said. Wouldn't it be nice to visit? Just to see the children. Jeremy still asks about you. That one landed deep. I miss Jeremy, his small voice, his endless questions about my design sketches, how he used to sit beside me coloring while I worked. I'll think about it, I said softly. Good, she said quickly. Relief flooding her tone. I'll let them know. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the phone for a long time. I wasn't angry, just uncertain. The past had hurt, but the present wasn't about punishment anymore. Maybe it was time to see what healing looked like. Even if from a distance. That Friday, I visited the site of my new project, the historic Westbrook Hotel downtown. The lobby was half demolished, beams exposed, light streaming through the scaffolding. My assistant, Claire, joined me with her clipboard. We could expand the atrium if we reroute the ducts, she said, pointing upward. Good catch, I replied, sketching quickly in the margin of my plan. We'll make it feel open, like you can breathe the moment you walk in. As we walked the site, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number, a photo of 2 kids, Jeremy, now 8, grinning with missing teeth. And in his lap, a baby with soft brown curls and curious eyes. Beneath it, one line. They ask about you every day. Thank you for helping us get back on our feet. D. When the court of consad read him, Daniel. I didn't respond right away. But I saved the photo. Then I turned back to the open lobby and whispered to myself, let's build something beautiful. By spring, the hotel renovation was complete. The opening night was dazzling. Journalists, clients, local press. My designs had turned the old space into something alive again. Sunlight spilling across polished stone, greenery weaving through the railings, warm light softening every edge. Ellen stood beside me at the unveiling. "You realize," she whispered, "you just turned a century-old building into a love letter to survival?" I laughed. "I think I just turned survival into art." Haplik the grass replays. She clinked her glass against mine. "To your next chapter, Allie." Later that evening, as I stood near the grand staircase greeting guests, I spotted my parents walking in. They looked out of place in their simple clothes among all the suits and dresses. But when I saw Mom smile proud, steady, no hidden agenda, my heart softened. "Allison," Dad said, voice thick with pride. "This is incredible." "Thanks, Dad," I said, hugging them both. "I'm glad you came." Mom's eyes glistened. "You built this with your own hands." "Not alone," I said, nodding toward Ellen. "I had help." She smiled knowingly. For the rest of the evening, my parents mingled politely, and I realized something I hadn't before. Forgiveness doesn't always need a dramatic speech. Sometimes, it's just showing up quietly, respectfully, and letting time do the rest. A few days after the event, my office received a delivery, a bouquet of daisies, my favorite. No card, just a small note. "The kids picked these, thought they'd make you smile. Rebecca." I didn't cry, but I felt something settle. Maybe it wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was recognition. A bridge quietly forming after a long winter of silence. Life moved on, work flourished, and one afternoon, during a design consultation, my client, a well-known restaurateur, leaned forward and said, "You know, we could use your eye for detail at our next location. It's a small space, but I want it to feel warm like home, but elevated. Warm but elevated." That had become my style, my niche, even. Spaces that carried both story and strength. I'd turned pain into purpose without realizing it. That night, I sat by my window sketching out ideas for the restaurant when a text came in from Mom. "Sunday dinner? Just us. Rebecca and Daniel will bring the kids. No pressure." That was no save the quitting at that. I stared at it for a long time. The glow of the city reflecting on my sketchpad. No pressure. 2 words I never thought I'd hear from my mother. I typed a simple reply. "Okay. I'll come." Sunday came. The air smelled like autumn, crisp, clean, full of memory. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I saw a familiar car parked beside theirs. Daniel's, and through the window, Rebecca's silhouette moving through the kitchen. My pulse quickened. I almost turned around. But then I thought of the letter, the daisies, the photo of the kids, and I walked in. Mom greeted me first, arms open. "You made it." Rebecca looked up from the kitchen island, startled. Her eyes softened, cautious but genuine. "Allison," she said quietly, "you look good." "So do you," I said, and I meant it. There were lines under her eyes, but there was also something human in her face I hadn't seen before: humility. Jeremy ran in first, arms flung wide. "Aunt Allie." I laughed, kneeling as he barreled into me. "Hey, buddy, you've grown." He grinned. "Sophia can almost walk now." Behind him, Daniel stood in the doorway holding the baby. Our eyes met briefly. No words, just mutual understanding. Dinner was normal. Awkward at first, but normal. The kind of quiet where everyone is trying not to step on ghosts. But there were moments: laughter from Jeremy, a shared glance with Rebecca that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When dessert came, Rebecca set a small envelope beside my plate. "I wanted to give you this," she said. "No speeches, just read it later." I nodded, curious but calm. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, the same one Daniel had texted, printed this time, and beneath it, a note in Rebecca's handwriting. "I can't erase what happened, but I can try to be different. Thank you for showing me what family really means, even when I didn't deserve it." For the first time in a long time, I felt tears I didn't have to fight, not because I was sad, but because healing had finally come full circle. Weeks later, I added a new framed photo to my shelf. Jeremy and Sophia laughing in a park. Sunlight glowing behind them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But connection. Family. In its own unfinished way. And sometimes, that's enough. Sunday dinners became something new, different from before. Not perfect. Not the forced performances we used to call family gatherings. This time, there was space for silence, for boundaries, for breathing. We didn't talk about the past much. No one mentioned that winter when I slept in my car, or the day Rebecca packed my things into boxes. But sometimes, in quiet glances across the table, I could feel we were all remembering. Only now, there was less anger attached to it. More understanding. The second dinner came 2 weeks later, then a third. It was after one of those dinners that Rebecca caught me as I was leaving. The kids had already gone to bed, and the house had fallen into that gentle, tired quiet that comes after long days. "Allison," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Can we talk for a second?" Instead of the dated finalities. I nodded, following her into the kitchen. The countertops were old now, chips along the edges, stains that wouldn't scrub out. It wasn't the sleek marble of the house they'd lost. But somehow, it felt warmer. "Lived in. I've been taking on small design projects," she said, wringing her hands together. "Home staging mostly, for real estate agents. It's not what I used to do. But it's something." "That's good," I said, smiling. "Starting over takes courage." She hesitated. "Daniel's been picking up shifts too. At the community center, he's helping with youth programs. In the escape revnowing from erective outnies without work confines." I could tell she was waiting for judgment, for comparison, for the old version of me who might have said something clipped and professional. But that person didn't exist anymore. "I'm glad," I said simply. "You're both rebuilding." She nodded, relief softening her shoulders. "It's slow. But it's ours this time. And I just wanted to say." She stopped, then tried again. "I see now how I treated you. How blind I was. And I don't expect you to forget, but thank you for not turning your back on us completely." For a long time, I didn't say anything. I looked at her, my sister, who had once been my betrayer, now standing in front of me stripped of all her armor. "You know," I said finally, "for a while, I thought forgiving you meant pretending nothing happened. But now, I think it just means I'm choosing not to let it define me anymore." Rebecca blinked, her eyes shining. "So, you forgive me?" "I do," I said. "But more importantly, I forgive myself for staying silent, for letting it hurt me as long as it did." She covered her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. And for the first time in years, we hugged. Not out of obligation. Out of truth. Weeks passed, and the air in Denver turned cold again, the kind of chill that reminds you of everything you've survived. My firm was growing faster than I'd ever expected. We'd just landed 2 new contracts, one in Chicago, and another in Seattle. I was traveling more now, balancing between meetings, design pitches, and late-night edits in hotel rooms. One evening, Ellen called while I was reviewing sketches at the airport. "You're becoming a ghost," she teased. "When's the last time you slept in your own bed?" "Can't remember," I said, yawning. "Maybe last Tuesday?" "You need a break," she said firmly. "Come to Boulder with me this weekend. No laptops, no drafts, no client calls. Just hiking and hot chocolate." I smiled. "You're impossible to argue with. That's why I win," she said laughing. Friday at 9 a.m. I'm picking you up. That weekend changed everything. The mountains were dusted with early snow, pine trees whispering in the wind. Ellen's cabin was small and cozy, with creaky wood floors and a fireplace that smelled faintly of cedar. The first night, as we sat under thick blankets with mugs of cocoa, Ellen asked, "Do you ever think about writing your story?" "My story?" I asked. She nodded. "You've rebuilt from nothing. You've learned things most people never do about boundaries, about family, about resilience. You could help someone who's still in that car, you know?" I looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and crackle. "I wouldn't even know where to start," I said honestly. "Start at the kitchen," she said softly. "The day you dropped your portfolio." I laughed, shaking my head. "You make it sound cinematic." Ellen smiled. "It was. You just didn't realize you were in the middle of your own story." That night, after she went to bed, I opened my notebook and began to write. Not for anyone else, just for me. The words poured out. Unfiltered. Unpolished. For the first time, I saw my past, not as failure, but as foundation. By spring, that notebook had turned into something bigger. A memoir. Or maybe a manifesto. A story about family. Forgiveness. And finding home when the world feels unsteady. Ellen helped me polish it. My clients encouraged me to publish it. But I didn't care about that part. Writing it was enough. It was the closure I hadn't known I still needed. When the first printed proof arrived in the mail, I opened it slowly. On the title page, the words stood alone in simple serif font. Blueprints for Belonging. By Allison Hartwell. Below it, the dedication. For anyone who has ever built a home out of heartbreak. The day the book went public, my inbox flooded with messages, strangers sharing their stories, thanking me for putting words to the pain they couldn't explain. Women. Men. People who had been betrayed by family, who had slept in cars, who had learned to rebuild. The comments were overwhelming, humbling, beautiful. Ellen called that night. "You realize you just turned your trauma into a roadmap, right?" "Maybe," I said, "but I think it's more like a blueprint." She laughed. "You and your design metaphors." "Hey, it's my niche," I said smiling. A week later, I got an email from a nonprofit in Denver. They were launching a program for women transitioning out of homelessness. They wanted me to help design the space somewhere safe, functional, and inspiring. I said yes immediately. The first time I walked into the empty warehouse that would become the center, it was cold and echoing. The walls were cracked, the floors stained with years of neglect, but I saw potential. I could already picture soft lighting, warm wood accents, colorful art created by the women themselves. Spaces that didn't just shelter, but dignify. I stood there for a long time, hands in my pockets, whispering to myself, "You know how to build this. You've lived it. There's usted and coldest." When I told Rebecca about the project, she looked proud. "That's incredible," she said. "You're helping people like you were. Like we were." I nodded. "That's the goal." For the first time, she didn't try to make it about herself. She just listened. And that small act meant more than any apology ever could. Months later, when the center opened, Rebecca and her kids came to the ribbon cutting. Jeremy tugged on my sleeve, pointing at a mural painted near the entrance, a skyline of Denver with the words, "We build stronger when we build together." He smiled. "That's you, Aunt Allie. You build things. The restoration rigor. The great fighter fair." I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Maybe. But I think I just help other people see what they can build too." He grinned. "That's even better." As the sun set over the newly finished building, Ellen came up beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Full circle," she said quietly. I looked at the crowd, families, volunteers, the women who would call this place home. "Yeah," I said. "Full circle." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the end of the story. It was just another beginning. The months that followed the center's opening felt like a new chapter, not just for me, but for everyone who'd walked through those doors. Every week, I visited the place, not as a designer anymore, but as a mentor. I'd sit in the community room walls painted in shades of dawn, gold and quiet blue, and listen to women tell their stories. Some were raw, others still guarded, but all of them had one thing in common. They were trying to start again. One afternoon, a young woman named Mariah lingered after our session. She was 22, quiet, with hands that trembled every time she spoke. "Miss Hartwell," she said, barely above a whisper. "How did you know you'd make it? When everything was falling apart?" I smiled softly. "I didn't know," I said. "I just decided that not giving up was the only choice I had left." "Non the watching, in nobody in the sittered max of sea." She nodded, eyes brimming. "It's hard to believe I could ever have what you have now." "You will," I told her. "But not because of what you'll get. Because of what you'll grow into." As she left, I looked around the room, the late afternoon sun spilling across the polished tables. This place, these people, they were living proof that something good could grow out of the ruins. That evening, Ellen and I celebrated 6 months of the center's success over dinner. "You've basically become the face of hope in Denver," she teased, twirling her pasta. I laughed. "Please don't say that. I still forget to water my plants half the time." She smirked. "Still. The book. The center. The designs, you've built something bigger than any project." I shook my head. "No, we did. You've been there since the start." Ellen leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rebecca hadn't kicked you out?" The question hung in the air between us. "Honestly," I said after a moment, "I think I'd still be living small. Playing it safe. Believing gratitude meant silence." She nodded. "Funny how losing everything sometimes gives you back yourself." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe that's the real blueprint." A few days later, I received an invitation in the mail. Not an email, an actual letter, with a gold seal and delicate handwriting. The Denver Women in Business Awards Gala. I'd been nominated for Innovator of the Year. I stared at the letter, stunned. I wasn't someone who chased recognition. I'd built my career on quiet persistence, but maybe this was different, not validation, but acknowledgement of everything it took to get here. I texted Ellen a photo of the invitation. "You're coming with me," I wrote. Her reply came back instantly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, boss." The night of the gala shimmered with city lights. The event was held in the grand ballroom of the Aurora Towers, a space I'd once walked through as an intern, quietly admiring from the sidelines. Now, I was one of the names on the guest list. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, but when I looked in the mirror before leaving, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Stronger. Softer. Whole. When I arrived, Ellen greeted me with a grin and 2 glasses of champagne. "Look at you, Miss Innovator," she teased. "Don't jinx it," I said, laughing. "I'm already nervous enough." We found our table, surrounded by architects, business owners, nonprofit founders, people who'd turned their dreams into blueprints. too. As the ceremony began, I tried to focus on the speeches, but my heart was racing. My name might not even be called. And yet, just being there felt like victory enough. Then it happened. And this year's Innovator of the Year goes to Allison Hartwell, founder of Hartwell Designs. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. Ellen nudged me. That's you, genius. The applause was thunderous. I walked up the stage, every step echoing in my chest like a drumbeat. The presenter handed me the award, a sleek glass sculpture, and whispered, "You've earned this." I stood at the podium, light blinding my eyes, and glanced out over the crowd. Faces blurred, but the feeling didn't. Gratitude, disbelief, and quiet pride. "Thank you," I began. "When I started my company, I didn't think anyone would ever call me an innovator. I was just a woman trying to build something stable out of instability. But what I've learned is that innovation isn't always about invention. Sometimes, it's about reinvention of spaces, of stories, of ourselves." I paused, the room silent. 2 years ago, I lost my home, my sense of safety, and what I thought family meant. But it led me here to new beginnings, new definitions, and a new kind of belonging. So to anyone who's rebuilding, remember this: the foundation doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to hold you while you grow. The applause rose again, warm and endless. When I stepped off stage, Ellen hugged me so hard I almost dropped the award. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, smiling. "We did." Later that night, after the gala, I drove through the quiet streets of Denver. The city glowed beneath the winter sky, a patchwork of lights and stories. I passed the familiar cafe where Mom and I had met months ago, the bookstore that had hosted my signing, the shelter that had once kept me safe. I stopped at a red light, and my reflection caught in the window a woman I barely recognized but finally respected. The light turned green. I drove forward. A few days later, I visited the center again, this time to check on renovations for the new wing we were adding. When I walked in, laughter echoed through the hallways. Mariah, the young woman who'd once asked if she'd ever make it, was standing by a bulletin board pinning up design sketches. She turned when she saw me. "Miss Hartwell, guess what? I got accepted into the interior design program at Metro State." I grinned, my throat tightening. "That's amazing, Mariah, you earned that." She smiled wide. "You told me I could build something out of what I went through." "You were right." I blinked back tears. "You built this yourself. I just handed you the pencil." That night, I sat at home surrounded by project files, emails, and drafts, but for once, I didn't touch any of it. Instead, I walked to the balcony, looked out over the glowing skyline, and thought about every version of myself that had survived to stand here. The girl who moved in with her sister out of hope, the woman who slept in her car out of necessity, the designer who rebuilt her life from the ground up. They were all still with me, proof that sometimes, survival is the greatest form of art. Winter rolled in softly that year, the kind of quiet snow that muffled the whole city and made even the busiest streets feel like a blank page. By now, life had settled into a calm rhythm. Work was steady. The center was thriving. Rebecca and I, well, we weren't best friends, but we were learning how to exist without reopening old wounds. That, to me, was enough. But life, as I'd learned, has a way of testing even the strongest foundations, not to destroy them, but to see if they still hold. One morning, I woke to a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was shaky. "Allison, honey. It's Rebecca. She's at the hospital. There was an accident on I-70. She's stable, but please come." I didn't even grab a coat. Just my keys, my phone, and my heart hammering so loud I could barely think. The drive to Street Luke's blurred past in streaks of gray sky and slush. I hadn't been in that much of a panic since the day I lost my home. When I reached the ER, Mom was in the waiting room, wringing a tissue between her hands. Dad sat beside her, silent, eyes fixed on the floor. "She's okay," Mom said the moment she saw me. "They said she'll recover. Just a concussion and a broken wrist." I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. Then I saw Daniel in the corner, holding Sophia, who was now toddling on wobbly legs, unaware of the fear that had gripped the rest of us. He looked up and met my eyes. For the first time, there was no awkwardness, just relief. "She's been asking for you," he said quietly. When I stepped into Rebecca's hospital room, she was awake, pale, bruised, but alert. "Allison," she whispered, managing a weak smile. "I didn't think you'd come so fast." "Of course I came," I said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "You scared everyone." She laughed softly, then winced. A delivery truck ran a light. I swerved. Guess I wasn't fast enough. "That we wants to expectin' for the safe friends. It we want not neverwhere." "Don't make jokes," I said, half smiling. "You're lucky to be alive." For a moment, we just sat there, the steady beeping of her monitor filling the silence. Then she reached for my hand, her voice barely audible. You know what's strange? When I saw the headlights coming at me, I didn't think about the house, or the business, or even Daniel. I thought about you. About how I'd spent years trying to be the sister who looked like she had it all together and how wrong I was about what that even means. I swallowed hard. You don't have to. I do. She interrupted gently. You built something from nothing, Allison. And I finally get it. You weren't trying to win. You were just trying to live right. I wish I'd learned that sooner. The tears came quietly, uninvited. I squeezed her hand. We're still learning, I said. Both of us. Rebecca stayed in recovery for nearly 2 weeks. I visited every other day, bringing her books, design magazines, and sometimes just silence. It was strange, sitting there beside her hospital bed, talking about small things like kids' homework or recipes, the kinds of things we'd never shared before because our relationship had always been built on tension. But now, it was gentler. Unforced. One day, she looked up from her book and said, You know, when I got that commission years ago, the one that started all this, I thought success meant never needing anyone again. But you've shown me it's the opposite. Real success is having people you can need and trust. I smiled. I'll put that on a coffee mug for you. She laughed. And for a moment, the years of hurt between us didn't exist. When she was discharged, I helped Daniel bring her home. Their apartment was small but warm, photos taped to the fridge, kids' drawings covering the walls. As I set her bag down, she caught my hand again. Allison, you didn't just save my life by showing up today, she said. You saved it the day you walked away and forced me to face myself. I didn't know what to say. So I just hugged her. Some things didn't need words. That night, back at my condo, I sat by the window, watching snow fall over Denver. I thought about the word family, how it had broken me once, then slowly rebuilt itself into something truer. Not an obligation, not a title, a choice. Family wasn't who demanded space in your home. It was who earned space in your heart. And this time I'd chosen well. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into clear skies and longer days. One morning, I received a call from the publisher who'd printed blueprints for belonging. Allison, we'd like to feature your book at the annual Denver Writers Summit, the editor said. You'd give a short talk about building from adversity, creative identity, and the meaning of home. I froze. Public speaking had never been my strength. I'd built my career in quiet studios, not on stages. But I also knew that this message wasn't really about me anymore. It was about the hundreds of voices who'd written to me since the book came out, the people who were still in their cars, in shelters, on couches, trying to believe they were worth rebuilding for. So I said yes. The night of the summit, Ellen sat in the front row, camera in hand, giving me a thumbs up. I stepped onto the stage, the microphone catching my breath as the audience quieted. 2 years ago, I began. I thought I'd lost everything. My home, my family, my sense of direction. But what I've learned since then is that sometimes the breaking is what lets the light in. I paused, scanning the crowd, strangers, yet familiar somehow. I used to think design was just about buildings and interiors. I continued. But it's not. It's about people. About giving shape to the spaces where we belong, even when life tears those spaces down. I told them about the center, the women who'd found their footing again, the families who'd built second chances. And when I finished, the applause felt less like noise and more like connection. Afterward, a young man approached me, eyes bright. My mom used to sleep in her car too, he said. She just got her first apartment. She read your book. Said it made her feel less alone. My throat tightened. Tell her she's not alone, I said. And neither are you. Wadian replayons. When I got home that night, I found another letter waiting in my mailbox, this one from a name I didn't expect, from Jeremy. It was handwritten, messy, in a child's uneven scrawl. Dear Aunt Allie, thank you for helping Mom and Dad. Thank you for building that place where people can stay when they don't have homes. When I grow up, I want to be a builder too. Love, Jeremy. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes, because that was it. That was the whole point. If kindness could echo through generations, then maybe everything I'd gone through had been worth it. The next morning, I framed Jeremy's letter and hung it beside my desk right next to the plaque from the Women in Business Gala, not as a trophy, as a reminder that the best things we build are never just for ourselves. The following year unfolded like the calm after a storm, that quiet, golden stillness when the world stops demanding that you survive and starts inviting you to live. Every piece of my life that had once fallen apart had somehow found its place again. Not the same as before, but sturdier, built with intention. The center in Denver expanded into a second branch. My firm grew to a team of 12. Ellen became not just my partner in work, but my closest friend, the sister I'd chosen along the way. And Rebecca, She was healing too. We still had our differences, we always would, but now we met halfway. We didn't try to fix each other. We just showed up. And sometimes, that was enough. One Saturday morning, Rebecca called. "Allison," she said, her voice carrying a note of warmth I hadn't heard in years. "The kids want to see your new office. Jeremy's been drawing floor plans for his bedroom, and wants to show you." I laughed. "Tell him he's hired." She chuckled. "Don't tempt him. He already said he wants to be just like Aunt Allie." Could backs her, my throat tightened. "I'll make some time this weekend." That Sunday, they came by. Jeremy bounded in first, holding a sketchbook nearly as big as his chest. "Look," he said, spreading it open across my drafting table. "This is our house, but I made it better. I added a secret room for Mom when she needs quiet." I smiled. "That's brilliant. Every home should have a space for peace." Rebecca stood in the doorway, watching us with a small, proud smile. "He spends hours drawing now. You've rubbed off on him." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said, teasing. "It is," she replied. For a few seconds, our eyes met, not as competitors, not as sisters keeping score, but as women who had finally made peace with their own past. After they left, I sat in the office, Jeremy's sketch still open on the table. It reminded me of something Ellen had said months ago. "You didn't just build walls, Allie. You built ways for people to breathe again." Maybe that's what all of this had been about, learning how to breathe after years of holding it in. Later that evening, Ellen stopped by, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You look sentimental," she said, handing me one. "Jeremy showed me his blueprints," I said. "The kid's a prodigy." Ellen smiled. "Of course he is. He has your DNA of determination." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset burn the city in amber light. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. "Every day," I admitted. "But this time, I don't need to chase it. I just want to grow what's already here." Ellen nodded. "That's a good answer." I took a slow sip of coffee. "You know, I used to think home was a place. Now I think it's the people who see you clearly and still choose to stay." "Then you're home," she said quietly. A few months later, Blueprints for Belonging was picked up for national distribution. The publisher wanted to host a speaking tour, cities, interviews, audiences. At first, I hesitated. I'd never dreamed of being a public figure. But this story wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd found themselves rebuilding from heartbreak. So, I said yes. The tour took me from coast to coast, from community halls to college campuses, from shelters to luxury hotels. Everywhere I went, people came up after the talks with tearful smiles and stories that felt like echoes of my own. A woman in Chicago told me she'd left an abusive marriage and started a new business. A student in Portland said she'd dropped out of architecture school after being homeless, but my book made her reapply. A father in New York handed me a letter his daughter had written, thanking me for making broken sound brave. Each story was a reminder. Every pain we survive becomes someone else's map. By the time the tour ended, I'd stopped calling it a career. It had become a calling. And yet, despite all the cities, all the applause, it was the small things that grounded me. Sunday coffee with Mom, dinners at Ellen's, Jeremy's messy crayon drawings arriving in the mail, those were the things that made all of it real. A year later, on the anniversary of the center's opening, we hosted a celebration. The hall was filled with families, volunteers, and women who had found their footing again. Rebecca and Daniel came too, along with the kids. Jeremy had helped paint the backdrop, a mural of open hands holding a city skyline. As the crowd gathered, Ellen took the mic first. "We started with an empty warehouse," she said, smiling. "Now it's a home for hundreds. And none of it would exist without the person who believed in rebuilding not just walls, but lives. Allison, come on up here." The applause was gentle but steady as I stepped forward. I looked out at the sea of faces, all different ages, colors, and stories, and felt a lump rise in my throat. "I used to think home was a roof," I said. "Then I thought it was people. But now I think it's something else. It's the courage to start again, even when you have no guarantees that it'll work out. That courage is what built this place." The audience was silent. Even the children stood still. I took a breath. "This center isn't mine," I continued. "It's ours. It belongs to every person who ever thought they were too broken to rebuild. Look around, this is proof that we can. Every story here is a blueprint for someone else's hope." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. I glanced toward Rebecca. She was crying, smiling through it. Ellen's eyes were bright, her hands clasped together, and I thought, this is what healing looks like. Not perfection, not forgetfulness, but presence. Later that night, long after the hall had emptied, I stood outside the building, looking up at the mural Jeremy had painted. The hands, the skyline, the sun rising behind it all. I traced the words at the bottom. "We build stronger when we build together." The same words that had once been just an idea in my sketchbook were now painted 10 feet tall on a wall I'd helped create. I smiled. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, the air alive with promise. On the drive home, the city lights stretched like constellations. For the first time in forever, there was no ache, no unfinished business. Just quiet gratitude. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a while. So much had changed from the girl who'd dropped her portfolio on a kitchen floor, to the woman who'd built a life out of second chances. And as I stepped inside, the warmth of my home wrapped around me like an embrace. On my wall hung Jeremy's letter, Ellen's toast framed beside it, and a photo from the ribbon cutting. Below them, etched in gold letters on a small plaque, were the words I'd written the day everything began to change. Sometimes the foundation has to crack before you can build something that lasts. Epilogue. Years later, people still asked how it all started, and I'd always smile and say, with a kitchen, a portfolio, and a truth I couldn't ignore. Everything's en mer, because that was the moment my real life began, the moment I stopped being a guest in someone else's story, and became the architect of my own. And if there was one thing I'd learned, it was this. No matter how many times life tears your walls down, you can always rebuild, stronger, kinder, truer. Because sometimes, losing your home is what finally teaches you how to come home to yourself. After the ceremony, I stepped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, carrying the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. The skyline glittered, alive and golden, and then, a voice behind me. "You still hate parties," Melissa said, smiling softly. I turned. "And you still show up to them fashionably late." She laughed, the easy kind. The one we'd both forgotten how to share. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I met one of your fellows last week, Lila, from Kenya. She's incredible. She said she wants to build her own version of Aurora back home." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "She will," I said. "She already has the spark. He's built me bonds for an 6. "You really did it, Christine," Melissa said quietly. "You turned everything they said you couldn't do into a blueprint for the next generation." "We all did," I said. "We just stopped letting their doubts define us." She hesitated. "Mom would have been proud." I nodded, looking up at the stars. I think she finally was. Later that night, I returned to my office. The building was quiet, city lights painting gold streaks across the glass walls. On my desk sat a box I hadn't noticed before, tied with a silver ribbon. A note rested on top, written in Melissa's handwriting. "You were right. Family isn't who you're born with. It's who shows up when the world doesn't believe in you. Thank you for teaching me that. Love, M." Inside the box was a framed photo. It was from years ago, before the fights, before the walls. The two of us as children, baking cookies in the old kitchen. Flour everywhere, our laughter frozen in time. I smiled, tracing the edge of the frame. Weeks later, Elizabeth and I flew to Kenya to visit the first group of Horizon Fellows. The girls met us at the airport, waving handmade banners that said, "Welcome home, Miss Christine." We spent the day touring their new event studio, a bright, bustling space full of color and ambition. Lila ran up to me, beaming. "Miss Christine, look," she said, holding up her first official contract. "We booked our first client a wedding next month." "That's incredible," I said, hugging her. "How do you feel?" She grinned. "Like I finally matter." Tears pricked my eyes. Because that's exactly how I'd felt all those years ago, the first time someone saw me not as help, but as capable. That night, as we sat under the Nairobi sky, Elizabeth asked quietly, "You ever think about what's next?" I smiled. "Always. And maybe it's time to step back a little," I said. "Let others lead. Let the next Christine find her own way." She raised an eyebrow. "Retirement?" "Not exactly," I said. "Evolution." We both laughed softly, the stars above us glowing brighter than any ballroom chandelier. When we returned to New York, I made it official. Aurora Events appointed a new COO, one of our earliest fellows. Elizabeth transitioned into CEO, and I, for the first time, allowed myself to rest. I spent my mornings writing, mentoring, and walking by the Hudson River. No meetings, no deadlines, just peace. One morning, I ran into Gregory Townsend. He smiled, eyes warm. "You finally slowed down," he teased. "Maybe I'm learning there's more to success than speed," I replied. "You built something that outlived you," he said. "That's what legacy really means." Years later, Aurora continued to grow, not as my company anymore, but as a movement, a story passed down. And sometimes, when a young entrepreneur would mention my name, I'd smile quietly, unseen, and think that's enough, because I didn't need the applause anymore, the recognition, the validation. I'd already won the moment I stopped fighting to be seen by the wrong people and started building for the right one. One evening, as the sun set over the river, I found myself back in the kitchen, not the one from my parents' house, but my own. I was baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. Flour on my hands, music playing low in the background, and as I pulled the tray from the oven, I smiled, because somehow, the girl who used to serve dinner to others, had finally learned to serve herself with grace, with pride, with peace. Final narration. Epilogue. They once treated me like a maid. But life has a way of rewriting stories when you refuse to stay small. I stopped chasing their approval and started honoring my truth. I stopped serving their expectations and started serving my purpose. And that made all the difference. The torch keeps passing. The light keeps moving. And maybe that's what love looks like when it grows up responsibility that never asks for credit. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Sophie was probably still awake, testing new equations. Somewhere in Zurich, Victoria was teaching a student to listen to their conscience before their ambition. And somewhere beyond all of it, Grandma's words still echoed. Roots through stone, Lizzie. Always through stone. Passing the torch. The next morning, I made it official. At the board meeting, I announced my decision to step down as chairwoman. Gasps filled the room. You can't. One board member protested. The institute is you. I smiled. Exactly. And that's why it's time. Sophie sat 2 seats away, stunned. You built this, she whispered. And now you'll build what comes next, I said. When the vote passed, I stood up, feeling the kind of peace that comes when you finally finish the story you were meant to tell. As I walked out of that boardroom for the last time, the applause followed, soft at first, then rising like the hum of the servers below. It wasn't for me anymore. It was for the idea that had survived me. The final conversation. That night, Reynolds found me sitting on the rooftop, watching the skyline. You really did it, he said quietly. We did it, I corrected. He handed me a mug of tea. You think they'll be okay without you? I smiled. They already are. He nodded, taking a sip. Then what's next? Rest, I said. And then maybe writing, teaching. I don't know, he chuckled. The woman who redefined energy doesn't know what's next. I love that. I leaned back, feeling the wind brush my face. Maybe that's what freedom feels like, not knowing, but not being afraid of it anymore. Their tackles go in self. We sat in silence for a while, watching the city breathe beneath us. The lights, the movement, the quiet hum, all of it built on the foundation of a single truth. You don't conquer the world by owning it. You change it by lighting it up and letting it go. The day I left the Morgan Institute, New York was quiet. No fanfare, no cameras. Just the early sun reflecting off the glass facade that once felt like a fortress. Inside, Sophie stood at the entrance, her hands clasped, eyes shining with that mix of pride and fear I remembered all too well. You're sure about this? She asked softly. I nodded. Absolutely. It's yours now. This not same for American. And my one. The automatic doors slid open behind me, the hum of the lobby fading into morning air. As I stepped outside, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally walking into the rest of my life. The world after. Weeks turned into months. And for the first time in over a decade, I learned what quiet felt like. No deadlines, no board meetings, no headlines with my name attached. I moved into a small cottage by the coast, far enough from the city that the stars were visible again. There was a garden. Salt on the wind. Birds that didn't care who you were. Most days, I woke with the sunrise and made tea instead of coffee. Some mornings, I wrote. Others, I just watched the waves. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for resting. Letters to the future. Every week, I received packages from the Institute, progress updates, press clippings, and letters from students. They called me Professor Morgan now. Even though I wasn't teaching officially. Sophie's updates were meticulous. New quantum grid extensions in South America. Partnerships with universities in Africa. Medical breakthroughs built from Aurora's architecture. Her last note ended simply. We did it. You were right, it keeps growing, even without you. I smiled reading that. That was the dream all along, to build something that didn't need me to survive. I opened my journal again, adding an entry beneath Grandma's last words. The moment you stop trying to control the legacy is when it truly begins to live. The knock on the door. One evening, I was sitting on the porch watching the tide roll in when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a young woman mid-20s, carrying a small recorder and a notepad. Dr. Morgan? She asked nervously. Yes, I said, smiling. Though I'm technically retired. She laughed awkwardly. I'm with the Global Chronicle. I'm writing a piece on the human stories behind the Aurora movement. I was hoping to talk to you. If you're willing. I hesitated, then gestured toward the porch. You've got good timing. Sunset interviews are my favorite. We sat as the sky melted into shades of orange and violet. So, she began. When people talk about you, they call you the woman who changed the world. How does that feel? I laughed softly. Heavy. And wrong. The world changed itself. I just refused to stop believing it could. She smiled. What made you believe? I looked toward the horizon, where the light met the sea. Because I'd already lived through darkness, I said. And once you've seen the dark, you can't help but fight for the light. The museum. A year later, I received an invitation, the Morgan Legacy exhibition, hosted at the National Science Museum. The email said, "We'd like to honor your contribution to humanity. Attendance optional, but deeply hoped for." I almost didn't go, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, said yes. The museum was filled with displays from every stage of my life. The first prototype coil from the basement lab, photos of our team in those sleepless nights, the letter from the U.S. Department of Energy, and, at the center of it all, a holographic globe of the Aurora grid, its lights pulsing softly across every continent. I stood there for a long time, watching it. Children pressed their faces to the glass, laughing as their countries glowed brighter. One little girl looked up at me and said, "Are you the lady who made the light?" I knelt beside her. "No," I said gently. "I just helped it find its way." The reunion. After the ceremony, Reynolds found me in the crowd. He looked older now, silver hair. Same irreverent grin. "Still allergic to speeches, I see," he teased. "Someone has to keep your expectations realistic," I said, hugging him. "How's the coast treating you?" "Too peaceful," I replied. "I miss chaos sometimes." He laughed. "You could always come back." I shook my head. "No. It's their turn now." He smiled knowingly. "You sound like her. Grandma?" He nodded. "She'd be proud. You didn't just build a company, Elizabeth. You built a conscience." His words stayed with me long after he left, because conscience, that was what all of this had been about from the beginning. Not wealth, not revenge, just the quiet insistence that doing good doesn't make you naive, it makes you necessary. Victoria's final goodbye. A few months later, I received another letter, no return address this time. Inside was a photo. Victoria, standing in front of a classroom, chalk on her hands, smiling. On the back, she'd written, "I finally understand. It was never about being the smartest in the room, it was about making sure others could stand in it too." That was the last I ever heard from her, and that was enough. The conversation with Aisha. Years later, when I visited the Nairobi campus named after the institute, I was introduced to a young physicist. Her name tag read, Aisha N. Morgan Fellow. She smiled nervously. "You probably don't remember me, but I wrote you a letter once when I was little. About a light switch." I froze. "That was you?" She nodded, laughing. "I kept it. I'm a quantum systems engineer now." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could do was hug her. "You're the proof," I whispered. "The world really does listen when you speak softly enough for it to lean in." She smiled. "Your light reached far, Dr. Morgan." "No," I said, smiling through tears. "Our light did. Full circle." That night, I sat on the balcony of my hotel, the city alive below. I took out Grandma's journal, now weathered, its pages soft from use, and wrote the final entry. "Grandma, the roots you planted grew through stone and reached every corner of the world. You were right, legacy isn't inheritance, it's invitation. And now, I think, it's time to let the next hands carry the light." I closed the journal and watched as the city flickered, thousands of tiny lights dancing in rhythm, each one a continuation, each one a promise. Epilogue. The Quiet Revolution. Years later, historians would call it the quantum renaissance. They'd talk about the science, the politics, the money, but that was never the real story. The real story was simpler. It was about a woman who refused to sell her soul for $3.5 million, and instead built something worth $4.2 billion, not in dollars, but in impact. It was about a family that fell apart so the world could come together. And it was about love, the kind that doesn't end, only changes form. Because the truth is, revolutions don't happen in crowds or speeches. They happen quietly in labs, in letters, in late-night decisions made by people who refuse to quit. And long after the names fade, the light stays.